Hey everybody, welcome back to the Nidus Anarchy series. I'm your host Adam, CIO and co-founder of Nidus. And today we have Wes Kussmaul, uh, who has written an amazing book called Quiet Enjoyment. I actually just got this last night, like I was just saying, so I scoured through this as much as I could. We got about 400 and some odd pages of really in-depth security knowledge. And I mean, to say that you go back from the beginning and you know more than most people I've ever spoken to about the beginning of the internet and what we've kind of gone through from a security perspective. I mean, I couldn't think of really. There's probably only like 5 people that know as much as you do. So I think for me, it's really exciting to be able to talk to you. I have a ton of questions. I went through, like I was saying, I went through your book. I made a bunch of notes, so I have a ton of questions. Very excited to talk about this stuff because I don't know too many people. I mean, this passionate about security, and this isn't your only book. I mean, you have others as well. So you've been doing this for a while. The future, what is that one? The future
The
needs
Future
you.
Needs You. That's a book for notaries,
Oh, okay,
but it's the same, a lot of the same material. It's just
cool.
directed toward the notary profession.
So obviously, for me, the big thing is you're starting from your history. Is you founded Delphi back in '81,
That's right.
and I mean that's almost when I was born.
Actually, it was 81 was still the world's first online encyclopedia,
Hmm.
and morphed into social media the next year in 82.
Okay.
Uh, So yeah, the original encyclopedia, exciting project, but as a commercial enterprise, it was a disaster.
And unfortunately, I feel that's how all computer passion projects go. And it's funny. I was actually just talking with some colleagues about this. I've been harping about this idea for the past couple of weeks. Is that I feel like we need a new internet. I feel like what we have, we just kind of it doesn't really follow where what the internet used to be created for. Like it was supposed to be like this wealth of information and knowledge and sharing and kind of openness between people to be able to make life easier, better, more efficient. And we've just gone down a completely different path, I feel like.
May I suggest that the internet does its job well when we consider that it used to be characterized, I think sometimes still is, as an information highway.
Hmm.
So what is a highway? It's an outdoor public transport system. How do we use highways? Typically, we use highways to go from building to building, indoor space to indoor space. Um, where are the buildings? And shouldn't that be the sort of, I mean, outdoors is a wonderful space to spend time in, but typically we're spending our time in buildings because that's the best place to share information. That's the best place to do things in secure environments.
Yeah.
You tend
And
to
I was
know who's in the room with you in a
and
building, whereas
your
outdoors
book,
you have no
you go
idea
into that
who you're
metaphor a
sharing
lot
space with.
about buildings, indoors, outdoors. So could you kind of give me the Rosetta Stone on the building metaphor with IT security, like kind of how those two kind of work together?
Sure. Think about a building. Um, how do you secure a building? Um, do you tell the lobby receptionist in an office building to identify the bad guys as they come through the door, determine their intentions and character, and flag the bad ones? Or do you tell your lobby receptionist, get some ID? It's about accountability, establish accountability.
Hmm.
Ask for a driver's license or even a business card, and issue a visitor badge and ask them who they're there to visit politely. And then you have a culture of accountability in the building. There's also a person in the basement watching a monitor looking for anomalies at the
Hmm.
entrances of the building, but that's the minor part of security. So we have all these constructs that we've developed over the years, decades, centuries, about securing physical spaces. You and I are both sitting in buildings,
Hmm.
and I know nothing about the building you're in, although you've got a background that suggests you're out in the wide open spaces. But I strongly suspect that you're actually in a room somewhere.
Yes.
And I am quite sure that that room is in a building that has an occupancy permit, which means that an architect, a contractor, and a building inspector have put their livelihood on the line, attesting to the habitability of that building. And that's why we have secure buildings. That's why buildings work.
So does this come with
Again,
to your authenticity statement? Because I notice authenticity is a common reoccurrence in pretty much everything as it's being a paramount topic in what you in your kind of your quiet enjoyment approach from what I'm seeing.
it's the word we decided, best sums it all up. Uh, you know, a most important part of authenticity is accountability.
Hmm.
Are you who you claim to be? To what extent do I trust your identity claim? Um, in social media,
So in
it's outdoors.
in
It's
your analogy
outdoors.
with
We
the
have no idea who we're encountering in the public park.
so
Uh,
your analogy with the building. So you're saying like we don't really question everyone as a bad actor when they walk in. We just say, hey, we need to verify your identity, and we do some checks to let them in. I would say yes for that's an agreement with like most offices, but if we take it like for me, the internet is a little bit different in the sense where that's like saying I'm going to protect the Nidus website. I really don't have a ton of people scouring trying to break into the Nidus website to do anything malicious. Now, like banks and other large financial institutions, I mean, that to me that's like a casino. So, do the casinos have way more security in place and think everyone's a bad actor to start? I would say it's more so that way because they have a lot more people trying to take advantage of them.
so now you've introduced a conceptual space that is between outdoors and indoors. It's called a public accommodation. A casino, and even a bank, if you think about it, a
Hmm.
bank does not discourage people from walking in off the street. A retail establishment doesn't. And in fact, if you think about it, a bank is more accommodating of everyone than is a retail establishment. Why? Because everyone has a bank account. It doesn't matter if they look like a scruffy bum. They need a bank account.
Hmm.
Um, and what's even more remarkable is you think, okay, what's the most secure space inside of a bank? Well, it's the vault, of course. Well, a vault must be, like Fort Knox. You can't get anywhere near it. No,
Yeah.
that's not the case. If you rent a security box at a bank, you get to go into the vault and check on the contents of your safe deposit box. Uh, so this category called public accommodation is wide and varied, but it's where you have the protections of boundaries, bounded spaces, but not so much identity. So outdoors, on the web, no identity. In a public accommodation, also very loose expectations around identity, but you do have the walls. And then in a building, not the public accommodation. So let's say you have the office building I was just talking about. It also has a retail space on the ground floor, a cafe and a knickknack shop or something like that. Those are public accommodations in the same building. You don't get asked for ID to go into those spaces,
Hmm.
but to go to the elevator bank and go up to the offices of the law firm that you were there to visit on the 18th floor, then you do need to make yourself accountable.
So when I'm reading through so quiet enjoyment, first at the title of your book, it took me a minute to figure out when I was reading through. So that you have the quiet enjoyment infrastructure. And it looks like it's
Right.
like kind of like a 12 steps of architecture around how a new security infrastructure could be designed for internet. Am I kind of putting it together? Like I said, I only read about a third of the book, so I didn't really get through it all. But am I close?
Yeah, 12 components in 3 groups. The first group is called the first infrastructure that's part of the quiet enjoyment infrastructure is called the authenticity infrastructure, and that's about identity,
Yep. And in
personal
there you call
accountability,
for a public authority component. So
public
it's
key.
where someone has to. The public authority, is that an actual group that has to determine yes or no, or are you saying this is something with systems that provide the yes or no response to that?
Well, this is a very old technology that this is about. It's PKI.
Hmm.
Um, I'm always hesitant to translate that into the words that are usually used because they're misleading, but I will. It's usually called public key infrastructure, which totally ignores an important part of the technology, which is the
Private
private
key.
key.
Yeah.
Um, but we call it the puzzle kit infrastructure because it involves the use of everyone is assigned 2 very large mathematically related numbers.
Hmm.
Anything that is encrypted with one of the 2 numbers can only be decrypted by the other of the 2. This technology is commonly used lots of places. Every time you go to an HTTPS site, which is basically all sites these days,
Yeah.
you're using that, we'll call it asymmetric cryptography. Blockchain is built on asymmetric cryptography, cryptocurrencies, NFTs, that whole world.
And that's what I was actually going to ask you about that because I didn't. I mean, I don't know if you get to it later, but I didn't notice the like what you just said, how PKI and also asymmetric cryptography really is blockchain. So, do you see blockchain and blockchain technology as kind of getting to the architecture of the QEI that you referenced before?
Well, we both use the same asymmetric cryptography. It's the heart of it. It's the core construction material. So consider it to be, the copper pipe and the wiring and the sheetrock and framing. That's
Hmm.
what AC is. It's a construction material. Um, where we part ways with uh, blockchain technology is they are very intently avoiding centralized authority. It's
Oh
all
yeah.
decentralized. So what about the counterparty to the other parties who you're dealing with is that they are the same as the transaction started with. You don't really have any idea who they are. You don't need to know if
Right.
cryptocurrency is fungible. One Bitcoin is replaceable with any other Bitcoin.
Yep.
Um,
But the
but there's no
wallets are not,
accountability.
right?
There's no accountability beyond that. Beyond
Right.
that.
Yeah, definitely
It's
not. And that's
it's
kind of
being
like the aim of the goal, is they want it to be
so
completely anonymous.
right. So what is it? It's among other things, it's a gift to crime. It's a gift to criminals. It's like now finally we can do business without accountability because nobody knows
I've
who.
never really bought into that, just because criminals, I mean, if you have a criminal mindset, you're going to find a way to make and move money. They always have. Always. Cash, gold, paintings, art. You know, what I mean, it's like if you got billions or millions to move, you can do it in different ways.
And
It makes it easier,
and
but that's like saying the internet was used to create, a place for people to buy and sell things illegally. Because they do it every day, but they
oh,
don't.
and at Delphi, we would get visits from the DEA
Hmm.
saying, we think this username has been dealing drugs.
Yeah.
And we need to know who that is. And we would say, you got a court order? They said, we're the DEA. Do we need a court order? You say,
Yeah.
yes, you need a court order. Go get
Yeah.
a court order and from a valid court.
Mhm.
And we will honor that court order and we will disclose the identity of the person.
Yeah. Well,
Until then, no, we won't. And I'm sorry, but blockchain has accelerated the pace of criminal activity online because, yeah, okay, you'll always find a way to pay the counterparty, but
but either
number
way,
one,
you
there's
can.
usually a lot of friction involved if it's outside of cryptocurrencies. And number two, you do leave a trail of crumbs. If that
Sure. Absolutely.
if that counterparty gets caught and decides to lessen their exposure to jail time, they know who you are. So, yeah, I mean, it's been a boon to human trafficking, among other things. But I don't want to dwell on that. I know that, crypto enthusiasts believe that it is that their network is built without centralized authority. It's not built without governance. And as Lawrence Lundy Bryan points out, he's a decentralization advocate, but he says there is no such thing as decentralized governance. And it's absolutely true.
Absolutely.
Do you get to run a node in a crypto network just by saying I'm here, let me plug in? No, there are rules, and those rules are made by centralized authority. If you're a node operator on Chia or Polkadot, you bet you have to abide by rules set by centralized authority. But by denying or pretending that there is no centralized authority, it sounds good. Yeah, the difference between asymmetric cryptography used in that world and asymmetric cryptography used in the PKI world, which, by the way, way predates blockchain. PKI was conceived at the same British Signals Intelligence Agency, where in decades earlier, Alan Turing's team had cracked the German Enigma code. But anyway, in the 70s, James Ellis asked the fateful question: what if we had a system where one key encrypts, then a different key decrypts, and that's what set off the imagination of the other two guys in that team, and they came up with PKI. But of course, it was a military secret, so they couldn't talk about it.
Yeah.
An American group came up with the same thing, and they could talk about it.
Cool.
Anyway,
so you also mentioned in the beginning of the book, you talk about ARPANET 3, and it's kind of this new botnet that's kind of feels like it's being almost like there is a centralized entity behind it, and that it's gaining power and control over data or possibly threats as the large bad actor as whenever they want to turn it on and off. Can you kind of go into that a little bit more? Because I'm curious really what it is you're kind of referring to there.
Well, that was actually written before blockchain gained traction. But it's simply the world's digital infrastructure, the world's information infrastructure being placed in the hands of authoritarians, intelligence agencies.
So are you saying they're actually purposely pushing out malware that's also viral and reinfecting as many servers as possible, and then creating a purposeful botnet that they can control? Is that am I getting that right? Or just I want to make sure I'm understanding what you're putting here. Okay, cool.
Well, that's what was created by Israel and the U.S. to disable the centrifuges that were that Iran had developed to refine uranium, and it worked. It worked very effectively, but it got loose in the wild, and has been used ever since, to build botnets.
There's one chapter that's titled Utopia 0.6. Before I even started reading the chapter, I thought that was a hilarious title, just because it's like Utopia is supposed to be, right, that whole, everything is perfect. And it's like, just by putting a version number on it means, well, the first one didn't work out so well, but we're getting there. And we haven't really released main release yet. We're still in kind of beta.
Right,
Can you kind of go into what Utopia 0.6 is? Because I thought that was awesome.
Utopia 0.6 is a world of accountability that is 6/10 of the way to Utopia. Of course, we'll never get to Utopia, but it's a world where PKI done right eliminates a lot of malware, fraud, the stuff that we see going on every day.
So how do we get there?
By getting people to think about how we have solved these problems in the physical world. The internet is and was an information highway, an outdoor public transport system. What do we do if we find ourselves living in cardboard boxes by the side of the information highway and letting our kids hang out in a cardboard box by the side of the highway and doing our banking on a billboard that's called a website? What do we do when we find ourselves living in such an environment? We find ourselves doing business in a bunch of cubicles in a parking lot beside the information highway. Someone needs to step up and say, hey, wait a minute, I used to hear about these things called buildings. It's just where you separate yourself from the outdoor, unaccountable outdoors. Why don't we have buildings? In other words, just think in terms of the proven solutions that we have come to rely upon in our physical life, and say, why can't we have that sort of thing in our digital life?
So,
and the answer is we can. And AC is the construction material.
So a lot of time you mentioned there's no security architecture. Like I've mentioned later, there's no real security architect that's been designed. There's no real security architecture in place. What do you mean by that? Because I mean, I know plenty of security architectures that are out there and are definitely in use today. So what do you mean by there's no security architecture?
Do you have spaces that are where accountability is the culture within that space online? Can you go into a space and effectively walk through with a badge that says you can rely on my identity claim? HR has issued me my employee badge.
Okay.
I think the answer is no. Companies are dealing with this all the time.
So is this where the national ID comes into place? Because you mentioned that a little bit about how there's different governments that have been trying it. Are you kind of for it in the way that this will help with what you're looking for?
Let's start with let's examine that baseline. You mentioned national ID. What is a nation? What's a nation state? It's a geographical patch of earth where a set of laws apply. I don't know about you, but every single day I'm dealing with someone in another geographical patch of earth where a different set of laws apply. In fact, every morning I have meetings at 6:30 a.m. and 8:30 a.m. and the reason why we meet so early is because we have team members who are in places where it's already evening.
Yeah.
But, you know, um, we need to rely on them, and we know nothing about national ID standards where they live, or maybe we do know something about them, but we're not subject to those standards and laws, nor are they subject to ours. I think the nation state is obsolete. Just this morning, I was using an illustration. I live in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has counties,
Mhm.
but nobody knows what they do. They don't maintain roads. They basically take a chunk of tax every year and maintain offices. Oh yeah, and I grew up in Norfolk County, Massachusetts,
Okay.
which still has an agricultural school.
Hmm.
Even though there probably aren't any or very, very few farms left in Norfolk County. It's a suburban Boston County. It's irrelevant. Counties are irrelevant, but still exist. Nation states are heading in that direction. Countries, I mean, really, why would a national ID be of any use to anybody anywhere in the world when we're always dealing across boundaries, packets of information
Wouldn't a
on the net? No,
passport kind of
nothing.
be the national ID?
And you know something we learned when we were launching Delphi, that we needed to get an IRC, International Record Carrier license, if we were sending messages across national boundaries. And,
Hmm.
you know, we kind of fretted about that for a while until we realized, oh, wait a minute, the law exists, but nobody
No one's enforcing it.
nobody enforces, nobody pays attention to it. Most people
Yeah.
don't know it exists.
Especially back then, like computers talking to each other was science fiction to pretty much the majority of the population, for sure.
Right. Right. Well, it was telegraph up until
Yeah.
ARPANET. And yeah, so I mean, really, what do national boundaries accomplish? Now, I believe the model for governance in the future is a municipal model.
Is that where the city of Osimo or comes into play?
Osmio is
Osmio?
our certification authority. It was
Okay.
chartered at ITU headquarters in Geneva, March 7th, 2005, to take over from the World eTrust Initiative. And this is a story that illustrates exactly what I was just talking about. So, two gentlemen at the International Telecommunication Union, which is a UN agency, decided that countries needed a way to conduct commerce across national boundaries, or even locally, so that they had a basis of trusting one another.
Hmm.
They said PKI is the platform. PKI will do this. So we're going to form the World eTrust Initiative, a global PKI with a central certification authority, and this solves problems.
So what happens
And
when the
well,
centralized authority gets corrupted?
you protect it as you protect any central authority. But the important thing is that certification authorities get corrupted because they're commercial enterprises.
Well, they turn commercial. They're not supposed to. I mean, look at our government, right? It's not supposed to be for profit, but somehow all of our senators are millionaires.
There's a difference between state and government. State gathers and applies public authority. Government gathers and applies public money. They're very different. They have different functions, but we've forgotten about them, especially, in the UK, people have a sense of the difference between them because, the monarchy represents state and government
Mhm.
Technically, when they elect a prime minister, the elected prime minister has to go to the Queen and say, "Hey, here's why I am entitled to run the government here." And of course, the Queen accepts those credentials. And if she didn't, that would probably be the end of the monarchy. But actually, it did happen in Australia. But I'm getting far afield. I really want to make this point about um, Osmio and national boundaries, and then we can talk about centralized authority.
Mhm.
So they created the World eTrust Initiative, and it was sort of a cooking up in a corner project, and the member states of the ITU, there are about, I don't know, 170 of them, and they mostly talked about other things, communicate, telecom standards and protocols, um, and the economic development function of the ITU is sort of the neglected third leg of the ITU. Well, then came time to roll out the World eTrust Initiative. And all of a sudden, the member states said, wait a minute, this appears to be a threat to the sovereignty of our national certification authority. And the answer is, well, yeah, you do need to be subordinate, not subservient, subordinate to the World eTrust Initiative's certification authority. So you apply
Well,
our root certificate in
and I
your
think you
nation.
mentioned though, you don't have to be subordinate, but if you choose to play in the game, then you have to be subordinate. That's kind of
Well,
like
if you're going
the
to be part
differentiator, right?
of, if you're going to allow people in different nations to trust each other and trust their assertions, then you need a central clearinghouse. Anyway, what happened was that the member states almost in unison said, this is a threat to our own, the sovereignty of our certification authority, and get this thing out of here,
Mhm.
basically. Pull the plug on that right now.
What
And
happened?
so those two guys that I mentioned, Hamadun Toure and Alex Natoko, um, invited us to take it over, basically. And they're at some political risk to themselves,
Mhm.
because they didn't want to see it die. They knew the world needs this. So
What was happening? What was the outside influence on them that was going on?
what?
You said there was the other national states and things like that didn't want this to occur. What were they doing to try to make that try to go away?
They're voting it down. They're the ITU is, is governed by the consensus of the member states.
Mm.
That's what the ITU is. It's like the United Nations. It is part of the United Nations, and so the member states set the agenda, and whatever the ITU does has to be, the initiative of the consensus of the member states. So if we're talking about displacing something that they feel is part of their sovereignty, um, they will vote it out, which they did.
Is there a way to make it where it doesn't matter what these nation states want? I mean, that's kind of how the internet came to be. It's how blockchain came to be. It's like
Yes,
someone
there
created
is.
something
Yes,
and the
there
people
is.
just said, screw it, we're doing it.
Yes, and it's exactly what happened. They said, all right, you know, we called ourselves the Village Group at the time, and Authentras. We still use the Authentras brand. They said, you guys take it and run with it. You have our authority. We created it, but it's got to be a separate entity because the member states of the ITU are not going to want to support this. So here you go. And we did. We took it and ran with it. I insisted that it take the form of a municipality because I feel strongly that, they wanted to make it like a pseudo national entity, like is used in the EIN numbering system. There's a pseudo nation called Bookland that issues book EINs. And but anyway, I said no, we don't want to make it a nation. The municipal model of governance is what is needed in global communities. My background is in social media, special interest groups, private label networks. We built one for National Review magazine. We built one for Biotechniques magazine. So you have these global communities. They need a system of governance. And what's nice about cities is they tend to be governed by activists. Why is that? Because you can get to City Hall, you can get to a hearing, right? Ordinary people who have the time and smarts and energy to get involved are the ones who effectively govern municipalities, whereas nations and states are governed. You have this layer of legislators in between the governed and the government. So anyway, that's why we chose the municipal model. And initially, Alex and Hamilton were not thrilled about that, but I think I talked them into it. But anyway, obviously I talked them into it because that's what we did.
So back to the centralization part though. So how do we regulate it so therefore it doesn't get corrupted? Because if there's only one singleized, like in your analogy with like the local municipality, like a city council, you can go there, you can make change, and if you don't like it, you can run, get elected, and then institute. And it's not that difficult at the city level because it doesn't cost that much money to do so, and you can talk to the people depending on the size of your town, obviously. But as you go up, it gets way more expensive and harder to get into, all the way up to national level, to where it's pretty much impossible unless you're kind of selected. Right. So if at the city level, if you don't like what the city's doing, you can either try to run and change it, or you can just move to a different city. Either way, they're not terribly difficult things to do. But at the national level, if you don't like what they're doing, you can't go anywhere. It's not like I'm going to go to Canada like everyone likes to threaten if they don't like the president or whatever. But if you have a single centralized kind of certificate authority, as you're mentioning, to provide the kind of the authenticity layer, what happens if they get corrupted? There's nowhere else to go. Doesn't the whole thing kind of die?
All right. But don't forget that all it does is certify. It doesn't, again, separate government from state, right? Government gathers and applies public money, resources. Government does things, initiates projects, right?
Okay.
Builds things, goes to war.
So,
but wait.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm still answering you, okay?
Okay.
State is like your vital records department of your city hall, right? Or the professional licensing department at City Hall. All it does is certify. It says, I've looked at I've examined the evidence behind this application for a certificate. Because that's what a certificate is. A certificate is authority attesting to a claim.
Right.
Adam claims that he's competent to drive. The Department of Motor Vehicles examines that claim. It doesn't try to build a car for him. It doesn't try to say he's a good person or anything else. It's just we attest to Adam's claim that he's competent to drive, and we issue a certificate called a driver's license.
So one directly to this though, it was on page 58, was required to build a secure facility. You have occupancy permits. So every online facility must have one of these digitally signed by a licensed architect, contractor, and building inspector. So is it occupancy permit?
Every indoor
Wouldn't that
space
kind of be the entry where like, well, hey, I want an occupancy permit to do whatever, and the central authority says no.
No, the central authority does not say that. The
Okay.
licensed professional architect, contractor, and building inspector. The
Right.
central
So all of a
authority has
sudden, that
nothing to
person
do
has
with it.
power
So
to
think
keep
about
people in or
notaries for a
out.
second. Think about
Okay.
notaries for a second. I am a notary in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I don't practice it much, but I can notarize your documents here in Massachusetts to my heart's content. I can charge you
Right.
money for it, and I never have to tell the state what I notarized. It's none of their business. They're not involved in the process at all.
Mhm.
If I were a justice of the peace, well, these days anybody can be an officiant at a wedding, but it used to be that
I am.
okay, well, there you go. But you're applying the authority of the
Yeah.
state to this assertion
All
between
right.
two
So
people
let's
saying
take the
that,
notary thing, because you obviously specialize in notaries. You have a book on notaries right behind you as well. So a while ago, I needed to have a document notarized. In Puerto Rico, everything has to be notarized, and down there, only lawyers can be notaries, which makes it way more expensive and irritating. So you have to pay $50 every time you want to have something notarized, no matter what it is, and everything has to be notarized.
that's
So I
because it's a
needed a
Latin law jurisdiction.
yeah. So
There are
I
two
needed a
Latin law jurisdictions in the United States, Puerto Rico and Louisiana.
Oh wow, interesting. I didn't know that. So when one of my so for these permits and stuff that I'm filing for business down in Puerto Rico, I had to get a document that says I give myself permission as the owner of my company to sign on behalf of the company. Something which is completely ridiculous, but I had to have it signed, and then I had to have it notarized. So I went to the notary at the bank because I was there, and I said, "Hey, I need to have this notarized." And the notary's like, "Oh, I can't do that because that's not something we notarize. Just that it's just a letter of you signing something." I was like, "What are you talking about? We do this all the time." He's like, "Nope, I'm not notarizing it." Like, okay. So then I went to another notary that I used before. No problem. We notarized the thing. I sent it down to Puerto Rico. Everything moved on. So the problem is, if I have a centralized spot and there's only one, and they choose not to notarize my document, and it needs to be notarized, I'm stuck. Thankfully,
You're
I had a
right,
second
and
notary.
and that sucks. You're right. You
Yeah.
don't.
So
That's why you don't have a centralized spot. What you need is what you need. And by the way, this is an important distinction between Latin law jurisdictions and common law jurisdictions, civil law jurisdictions. A Latin notary is a lawyer, but and is an attorney for the public.
Mhm.
That is, you don't advocate for one party versus another. You're representing the public, and that is, yes, you of course have adversarial lawyers in Latin law countries, but and I was present, allowed to be present at a closing of real estate in Italy for a nonprofit was buying a building, and they use PKI certificates to digitally sign property transfers. And this was years ago. But anyway, that's another matter. The notary, the lawyer in that case is a notary, a Latin law notary, which is, yeah, they have to be legally trained, but they can't be advocates for anybody but the state. I mean, the public, excuse me, anyone but the public. Their charter is to, quote, keep men from dispute. And what happened was that both parties had forgotten to include a deeded parking space with the transaction, and so the closing didn't happen. Jurisdictions like the United States, you have advocates trying to put one over on each other, and that's why we have so much litigation in the United States, so much less litigation in Latin law jurisdictions.
Yeah. Well, also, I don't know about Louisiana, but in Puerto Rico, you have a lot less litigation because everyone knows one person's got the judge in their pocket. So if you don't, you're going to
That's,
lose before you even start.
it's much less so in Italy and France,
I would imagine, yeah.
and certainly, yeah, I mean, Latin America, it's the same way.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
I was just on your LinkedIn profile, and you just posted an article talking about an interview with Jordan Peterson and Niall Ferguson, I think it was. I forgot the other guy.
yeah,
And it was about how did Germany give way to Hitler? Like, how did something like this happen? And you mentioned something in there that I thought was so smart. You said that you have this problem where you got 2/3 of the people are stupid, and a third of them. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. You said this in much nicer terms, but 2/3 of the people are stupid, and a third of them are smart. The problem is the 2/3 that are dumb think they're smart, and
it's
the
the
other
other way
third that are
around.
smart are
Other way
hesitant.
around. I'm sorry, you're impugning to 1/3 of the public. 2/3 are smart
Are
enough to.
smart? Oh, okay. I think a
One
third is
third.
smart. Maybe that's what it's
The
trying to say.
1/3 is the portion of the population that is susceptible to what I call Goebbelsology,
Okay.
after Joseph Goebbels. And actually, the technique was invented by the nephew of Sigmund Freud, um, who it's funny, nephew on both sides of his family, um,
Wow.
who came up with a technique to manipulate perceptions, which was adopted by the American advertising industry, but also adopted by none other than Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler. And it's the populist appeal. It's, you select the most gullible portion of the population and use these techniques to get them to believe whatever you want them to believe, through partial truth, through repetition, through very simple language. And I in another Substack article that is linked in the one you're referring to, I do describe, I cite the methods of Goebbelsology.
Oh, awesome. I'll have to check into that. So
So,
so dumb people thinking they're smart. I've always heard that as a Dunning-Kruger effect. So it's like people, you can only
yeah,
think you're as smart as you are. You can't really realize what you don't know. Is there a
they're the
term for the
most
other way
vocal
around?
because they're the most convinced they're smart.
Yeah, like I
Whereas
know
the
exactly what
top
I'm
third
talking about.
are they're aware of more complexities. They
Yeah.
perceive the complexities of the world, and therefore they're not quite so quick to say, I've figured it all out, I know it all, and here's what must happen.
I think when I was a kid, it was actually back to computers. I used to run a bulletin board system back when I was like
Oh,
14
wow.
or 12, 13, 14, a long time ago. And my mom, she worked at the post office. And there was another guy at the post office, a letter carrier, that was also into computers. So she's like, hey, you should probably hang out with this guy. He talks the same way you do. So she brought me over to his house one day, and I went to his basement. He just had computers and file cabinets full of like floppy disks and crazy stuff everywhere. I'm like, this is amazing. And we started talking, and I was telling him, I'm like, oh yeah, I know all this stuff. I've done all this. And he's like, look, I'm going to tell you something. And this has stuck to me. I have no idea his name, but this piece of advice stuck to me forever. And what he said was, the moment you realize you know nothing, that's when you know something. And it's like
Totally, totally
so
agree.
true. It's like when you realize there's just an infinite amount of knowledge out there about any topic, and that you only know this much. Like, man, I'm an idiot in this topic because you can never know everything. It's like, okay,
Well,
maybe you actually do know
in
something.
that case, you've got to read another Substack article of mine. Here I am. It's kind of contradicting what we just both agreed on. But anyway, now I have one that's entitled, What Has Religion Got to Do with God?
Okay, I can see that.
So,
I'm down. I won't go into it on this one, but I'm down to
yeah,
check it
we've
out.
already ranged far enough.
Is there a term for smart people that think they're stupid? Like the opposite of the Dunning-Kruger?
Yeah, it's called smart people.
Okay, I can live with that. That's pretty awesome. Okay, so yeah, that's pretty awesome. I don't have too much else. I mean, this has been an amazing amount of wealth of knowledge that when I went through this book, I can tell you, like, I thought I knew PKI and how it could relate to security. And I think as soon as I read like the first 5 pages, I realized I don't know anything. So I know I only got through like the first third last night, but I can tell you, like, my weekend is going to be finishing this book because there's so much like little nuggets of information in here that I just personally find just fascinating, and like it's really cool. It's like I get an insight to a bunch of knowledge that no one else really has. Is kind of what I feel like when I'm reading the book. So I think it's pretty amazing. I'm really happy that you got me a copy too.
Record that for a commercial.
No problem. You can use this however you want. All yours.
So, no, that's great to hear, and thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything that you wanted to say or to tell people before we kind of wrap it up?
Just this. The problems we face with our information infrastructure are practically identical to problems that we have solved in the physical world. Look to old solutions, professional licensing, occupancy permits, driver's licenses, license plates. You want accountability with anonymity? They figured that the solution was invented in 1903 by the founder of the Boston Symphony Orchestra,
Wow.
Higginson. He
Little
invented
nuggets
the
of
license
information.
plate. The license plate. Like, how do you make people accountable for what happens on public roadways without putting their name on the car and making them personally trackable? License plate. So anyway, though the solutions are out there. Conversely, and this is something, there are a few things that I've come up with since that book, and one of them is called the WTI industry, or wrinkle treatment industry. What is a WTI? It's an industry that thrives as long as its products don't work. So security is a cops and robbers industry. Chasing bad guys chasing digital bad guys is an industry that generates $200 billion a year, growing rapidly. Those Tanium commercials, I didn't share the Tanium commercial, but Tanium ran full-page ads last year in the Wall Street Journal saying security isn't working. We're spending all this money and it's not working. Why doesn't it work? Well, one reason is make a lot of money when it doesn't work. When it works, it's a WTI.
Say, as a consultant, the best paying gigs are the ones that take the longest and they're the most complex to figure out.
There is a prominent security person who advocated in the pages of VAR Business magazine, said, seek out security solutions that are complex and involve a lot of different pieces. That's how you make money. Whatever you do, don't solve the problem.
Oracle Identity Manager.
So accountability solves problems. Also, the revenue model, when I was in social media, the revenue was you pay by the month or you pay by the minute. There was none of this, if the product is free, you are the product. Now, of course, it's your information residue, it's your relationships. And oh, by the way, those who pay the highest prices for information that identifies you are ideological groups that largely serve that bottom third of the population, because they're the ones that are easiest to get all excited and get bonded to your message. And oh, by the way, while you're there, they'll sell you miracle cures and get rich quick schemes, and they're all very profitable. So anyway, accountability is a threat to the business models of social media.
Cool. Well, thank you. I think that's amazing.
Well, thank you.
Appreciate it. So, you going on a book signing tour? What's going on?
I should.
Yeah. Cool.
First, I need to
Well,
come out with a third edition of Quiet Enjoyment.
well, next time you're in New York, if you ever come down to New York, let me know. We'll meet up, grab a coffee, and I'd love to talk more.
I will do that.
Cool. Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Adam.